Hello, I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Well, as we know, the world of work has changed so much in the last few months with online work for businesses, students studying from home. A lot of things have happened. And today we're going to look at cybersecurity. Joining me, Jason Rincker with Stronghold Data. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Judy.
I know we've visited in the past, in the last few years, about the importance of being secure with your computers and your systems, but of course today we're hearing so much more about cybersecurity and how important it is, because everybody seems to be dependent on that computer at home.
That is correct. Cybersecurity plays a very integral role in everything that we do at every organization because their dependency on technology to operate, whether that is school. We went to online classes, during the pandemic. We had a lot of employers select a remote workforce as an option to continue their business during the pandemic. So those are some recent examples.
And are there more concerns, not only because more people are doing it, because there are potentially more threats? People want to take advantage of that?
Well, yes, and you can see that with the types of alerts that they're receiving from, the FBI. Mm-hmm. And they've constantly been notifying not only individuals but organizations that they need to be aware of these threats as they're increasing. So during this pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, we see a lot of phishing emails because people are interested in learning about COVID, like, maybe how many people are infected in their city or their county. And so these emails sometimes will pop up. A warning that I saw came about where they were sending termination notifications to people due to the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And these phishing emails are really an attempt to get employees to open up the emails, click on the attachment or the link to infect their system. So these phishing emails, they don't care who you are or what you do. They are just there to cast a wide net and see who is captured into that.
Well, I know you have a presentation, a PowerPoint will kind of help us as we go along today. So let's have that start showing on the screen, and we'll start talking about what we're talking about in terms of cybersecurity and what we're looking at. Of course, we're talking about cybersecurity during a pandemic.
Correct. And that's, again, I really appreciate you inviting me on to talk about this, because every organization, it doesn't matter what you do or how many employees you have, if you have a full IT staff or no IT staff, this is something that really, this information is for business leaders, business owners. Mm-hmm. So hopefully they'll find some value in that.
Okay, let's move along to the slides, and we can go back and forth between full screen and partial screen as we're going through.
So that's just a quick picture of the underground data center, that Stronghold Data. We've been in business here for 30 years in the Joplin community. So service, the states of Kansas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri out of this data center.
Okay, show the security aspect of it.
And this is just a quick joke. Is in the IT world, we talk about how IT decisions are either made at the CEO level, CTO level, but during the pandemic, it's the COVID-19 that really has transformed what we do, and we kind of hinted to that about how organizations have chose to have a remote workforce or doing a lot more education through the remote type work.
So it brought up a whole bunch of issues we hadn't perhaps thought about.
It did. Before. I mean, there was a lot of challenges that were involved in there, and what you see, if we can go to the next slide, one of those things was the CARES Act, and this is just a copy of
the congressional
page. And this CARES Act did a lot for small businesses in our community and large. It gave them the opportunity to apply for some money and to help keep employees at their business and some other expenses. And now, as you notice, you go ahead and go to the next slide. You're able to see that CARES required you to go to and obtain like a loan. And this article talks about that those that went and applied for a loan through the SBA, their information was compromised. This one talks about 8,000 loan applicants. And so you think about these small businesses during the pandemic as they're applying for these loans, what information did they give? Both personal and probably business related information that is now out there. So just applying for the loan was a risk in itself.
The government agency was
breached, yes.
Right.
And this should concern you, and the amount of information that's out there. And you can go ahead and
go to the next slide.
The next slide You know, these are those announcements I was talking to you about. March 20th, this one came out about the, you know, those rise in the schemes, and that's what you brought up. And definitely, they're still ongoing. There's still a lot of them out there. We can look at the next announcement that the FBI put out there. Notice the dates. I mean, they're coming out almost every other week, and talks about how they're taking advantage of these virtual environments. So these are those environments that employers or students are using because maybe you're not setting that up properly. So there's some security risk there. The next announcement that came from the FBI just, you know, a few days later, talks about how it's business email compromise. You see that in there. BEC is the acronym that it stands for. And that's just using email to accomplish this fraud, nothing more, and getting people to do things they normally wouldn't do. And it's not going to go away when they're making $2 billion. And as we went through the month of April, you can see the next announcement from the FBI.
So on the next slide, we have another one
on April 20th, and this is
so just keeps growing.
What I'm trying to show here and demonstrate is that they're trying to get the word out to these organizations, to individuals about the risk. We see the next one come out in May. And this is the one I was talking about briefly, is how the fake emails are showing that they're terminated. And they find creative ways to get those employees to open these emails.
We want you to click on this attachment.
Right. And it's that curiosity. It's like, am I getting terminated, or is maybe somebody else getting terminated, right? So that's the curiosity here. So the idea behind this is the information is out there. We are being warned about the threat and what it can do to any organization, large or small.
So behind the scenes, you have organizations like the FBI and a lot of agencies who are trying to counter or find out what's happening.
Right, they're trying to get the word out, and that's kind of what I see our relationship here today, Judy, is we're trying to educate our community about the threat. A lot of organizations think, well, I'm a small business. I'm in Joplin, Missouri, or in Pittsburgh,
Who's
Kansas.
Mess with me?
Who is going to touch me? But it's not necessarily you. But you do have things that they want. You have data they want. You also have money. And if you're willing to pay that part of that $2 billion that the one mentioned, that's just something for them to walk away with. But you also have relationships with maybe larger organizations. And that could be a way to get into those larger organizations.
So we talk about the World Wide Web. It's really that web. You're one piece of that overall picture. Once they get into you, they could go into other places.
That's correct. It's amazing how interconnected we are. You could be having a Zoom call like you were talking about with anyone, anywhere. And we are connected very well.
Let's go on to the next one and see what we have for the slides. And continue our presentation.
So in this piece, and you can kind of go through this you can flip through these next few slides at your will, but what I'm covering here is cyber liability insurance. I'm not an insurance agent, but we see a lot of businesses choose to address their risk with cyber liability insurance. It's something that's evolving and growing very rapidly. I think that they say that over the next 18 months, what you're going to see is payouts of cyber liability insurance greater than natural disasters.
Because people are needing to call those claims, right?
So what you're seeing in the background here are questions. What questions are asked for you as an organization from an insurance perspective? Those are just examples that you see up there. The one that in the box that was just in red is talking about you're agreeing to continuously implement different standards and procedures when it comes to cybersecurity or cyber standards. Right. So COVID, when we talk about what happened with COVID, and as we go to this next slide, what you're going to see is some renewal questions to maintain that coverage. And this is where you really need to have a great conversation with your insurance person, your IT representative, and you need to sit down and answer these. So if you see under D, number 3D, it says mobile device security. So what did that change for an organization when they went to a mobile or remote workforce? And they really need to take a look at what answers was originally part of that application and where are they at now. So we talked about a lot of students from Missouri Southern that had classes in the classroom and they were moved to an online.
You're at home with your laptop.
Right, you're at home with a laptop. And so think about that from a business perspective, is now as you're sending those employees home with that laptop, what security measures that were not in place when you answered that insurance questionnaire. And by doing so, and as we get to it, I have a story in there about Cottage Health. And that's a couple slides down the way. Cottage Health was a healthcare provider. They had a data breach in 2013, 2014. years ago, but finally their insurance company came back and is now suing Cottage Health because they want reimbursed for what they paid out for this data breach. They're saying Cottage Health did not follow their processes to have that in place. And because of that, this was the initiation of the lawsuit. And we're seeing more and more of that because the insurance companies, they're expecting you to do your thing. And so now as a business owner, back to the pandemic, back to cybersecurity, as you make changes, you really need to understand what changes you're making and how that impacts. And if you need to notify your insurance carrier that you have made those changes, might be a good time to pull that out as an organization and really review that. So,
do you feel that a number of companies, because of the quick timing of shutdown orders, stay at home and so forth, maybe didn't have that complete plan in place, and suddenly I've got to send John Doe home with a computer to do his work?
You're absolutely correct. I mean, it happened so fast that many organizations were scrambling, to figure this out. But this would be a good time to go back in there now that we've kind of been in and done this. I just don't want people to forget about it.
Right.
And as we are coming back to the workplace, we may have not changed some of the things back. So there's a risk there. And this is a good reminder to go out there. It's kind of like when we create a will and you put it in the lockbox. I mean, you don't...
Things change over
right,
time.
Things change. So you need to go pull that out and redo it. And that's the purpose of talking about the cyber liability insurance. And it'd be a good time to have a conversation with your agent.
Right.
And as you go on...
Let's move on to some other slides.
A few slides. Keep going. You're going to see the Cottage Health story is the next one in here,
right.
And that's what we just already covered.
Right.
So if you want to keep going to the Dilbert
kind of go
cartoon,
right.
So this is a comedic moment, right? I like using this because we think about disaster planning, especially our community after the tornado in 2011. Disaster planning for organizations really took on a new meaning. So as you see in this next slide, this pandemic should have raised some questions in your organization about having a pandemic policy. And that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit. And you can see an example of one in the slides as far as a pandemic policy. And you need to have this in place now. Now, this is not something that would take the place of a disaster recovery.
So it's a new type of approach.
It's a new type of plan that an organization, when they have time now that it's after the fact, they need to have one of these in place. And you can see an example of it on the next slide. It's a template. Be happy to share with you, but this is something that you want to sit down with your leadership team and maybe your legal counsel and other advisors, trusted advisors, and really work on this. And another thing that you need to have in place as an organization, if you go on ahead and go to the next slide, is a digital acceptance policy. So you think about sending all your employees home, and now they're asked to sign documents potentially electronically.
Right.
Do you have some sort of formal document in place that tells them what they can and cannot sign? And that's what this policy would do, is it allows them to really set forth, like, you can sign this for the company on behalf of the company, or you can't. And that's why they need to pull something like this out and have it in place as part of that pandemic policy.
It's not like you can go down the hall and talk to the boss and
say, hey, what do you think about this? And maybe they don't even think about that. So that's exactly right. So that's what a digital signature policy.
Okay.
Some other things that businesses or organizations need to think about as we go on to the next slide is other policies, an acceptable use policy, and a BYOD, or bring your own device policy. We talked about education, and a lot in our K-12 environment, they already have a BYOD policy in place, and that allows students to bring their devices in and connect to the network there at school and operate, and then take that device home at night. So now we're looking at employers doing the same thing. But you really need to have those policies in place to set forth those expectations of what you need. Same with an acceptable use policy when it comes to technology, what you can and cannot do. And as we go on down these remote work readiness slides, these are things that you need to be considering when you're an organization. A secure VPN connection, which VPN, virtual private network. The next slide is going to show you in a quick example. It's a connection from your device back that doesn't go through the public side of things. So that's what a VPN is. They're really easy to get. You can even buy those on a personal level, a consumer level, so you could connect your students back to school if you wanted to. There's a lot of services out there that allow that, but it helps protect you. It's a layer of protection
So
there.
for a company, you're feeling that gives us a little barrier there between just that public internet floating
Yes,
around.
you definitely want this VPN in place. So as we move on to the next slide, you're going to see multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication, and you see the example I have on the next slide, is nothing more than you have a username and password that allows you to log in, but you have something that you have. So a lot of consumers probably use online banking, and online banking now we're getting to where they log in, but then they have to have a code sent to them on their...
They'll send you that text message with a code. Right?
That is multi-factor authentication. Dual factor authentication is another name for it. But again, it's something you know, like your username and password, and it's something that you have, and it's that mobile device. So we see that from like online banking, but this is a suggestion for organizations. As you have a remote workforce, you might want to consider employing these layers of security to make sure you know who's logging into that device. We see a lot of people through the connected network, the internet like you were talking about. People can log in remotely from various locations, and we want to make sure that you have the right person logging in.
So that person who should have authority really is that person who's saying they, has
Yes,
to sign into the
right.
programs.
And we see it all the time where somebody will log in from a remote location and they should not be logging in because through those phishing emails, maybe someone has given up their credentials. So they've given up something that they know, like their password and their username.
So this makes somebody a little bit tougher to get into that system.
Correct.
If they're going to opt for it.
That is correct.
Right.
So as we move forward, those are definitely tips. The one I want to talk about now is collaboration tools. You mentioned Zoom, that you did a lot of interviews on Zoom was a tool
For
that you used.
Newsmakers.
Correct. Zoom was something that came out. They had some security issues. As you go to the next couple of slides, you're going to see an article that talks about those security issues with Zoom. Zoom's done a lot to try to get back on board with enhancing their security. The point of this is as you went to a remote workforce or education, at home, new tools were needed to accomplish this. We didn't maybe spend the time vetting those tools, like you had mentioned earlier, is like you need to really understand what you're introducing into your environment, take the time to understand those risks, and this may require you looking at that insurance policy like, hey, we're introducing new tools to work mobile. And this article that's on the next slide talks about Zoom and those security issues. I think they even impacted them at the congressional level when they were trying to do some Zoom meetings and they called it Zoom bombing, where people are watching that. So that's what this is. As you go on to the next slide, password guidelines. We all hate passwords. I know it's kind of, because we were forced to change them and all that. Yeah.
Right.
So the policy that you see in the next slide is you really need to have it written down that you need to have not only how you create your passwords, but the protection, and that's in the red box there. You have to protect those credentials whether you're working at home or whether you're working at the office, because those credentials is that first layer of defense. We're having a lot of discussions now about wearing masks, and that mask is that first layer, right? That is what this password policy that you need to have in your business. And as you...
So employees and communication with management need to understand all of this and tying it together.
Yes,
Right.
well, and this is something that you can use at home. You really need to maybe have that conversation with your children on creating those credentials at home and how you protect them, and not just choose, password 123 or something along those
the common
lines.
things that people can figure out.
Right, because you have some sensitive accounts at home, whether that's on the education side or whether that's on your personal finances or medical history. So those credentials are important to you at home as they are as your organization at work.
Right. Well, let's move on to the next slide then.
So what we wanted to talk about here is credential stuffing. So while we're talking about credentials, is those are commonly found on the dark web, and meaning those being credentials. So your passwords are for sale. How do they get those? They get those through data breaches. So this article that you see back here, again picking on Zoom, is people's credentials that were for sale on the dark web were allowing them to log into their Zoom accounts. So you think about your personal accounts, Judy. How many accounts do you use the same password for?
So that's why I say try to have a unique one.
Right, you need to have a unique one for every, and then in the next slide, the little tip I give here is consider a password manager tool, and that's something that's going to allow you to have that unique password for each and every time. And yes, people ask, well, how safe is
Right.
Is that?
Is it secure?
Do your research on the companies that you're going to do business with, and really understand their security protocols. But you trust your bank just like those 8,000 people trusted their bank and the SBA to protect their information, all that data that you give. So it's no different.
Great. So the individual responsibilities as well as we're talking about the business responsibilities and tying things together.
Correct.
Right. What about the aspect of, we hear, the virus check programs, and a lot of people when they started working from home or the kids were at school, we heard people saying, make sure you have those virus protection programs on your computer and they're up to date.
Great. That's a great tip, and I think that's coming up in the next list in the slide is we can really quick if you want to stay with this. All these slides, and you can go to the next one, is talking about your third-party risk. Third-party risk is those vendors we're talking about. And the example this article is talking about is think about Ford and General Motors. They were asked at the height of the pandemic to stop producing automobiles and vehicles and start producing ventilators. And when you have a change in your manufacturing processes, you're probably bringing on new tools and creating new credentials. So you're opening an opportunity for that risk because we're all trying to rush to do that. So as a business organization, really vet your third parties. As we go to the next slide, it should be the list to get to your question. Right. And that is number 2 on the list, is be sure to have good antivirus. That antivirus you're talking about is when you go home with your device, there's free ones out there, but you might want to consider purchasing a much better one. And you want to have those up to date. A lot of times you'll see your computer that says, hey, it's time to update this, and we're right in the middle of maybe buying something on Amazon. I'll get it later, and we forget and we don't go back. So that is, tip number 1, be worried about the phishing attacks like we talked about. Have the good antivirus, patching your system. So we think about this on your personal devices like your mobile device, whether it's an Apple or an Android. We get that message that says, hey, it's time to update it.
Tonight it's going to automatically update while you're
allow it to do it, because usually it's bringing back some fixes for bugs, patches for some security issues. When you're working from home, again, whether you're doing this as a remote workforce for your employer or you're doing it for your children who's now taking some online stuff, change that Wi-Fi password on your account. Make sure it's not just the factory setting or something there. You want to make sure you're in control of that. That whole password 123, right? So if you look at the next slide, this is something that you and I talked about, is social media. But it also leads into what is called social engineering. This is an example that you see on the screen right here of something very commonly goes around on Facebook and other social media.
One of those posts that people see.
And I stole this from one of those posts, and it says, stop sending your potential passwords or other memorable data to people who collect this for social engineering. You really need to be aware of the things that you're putting on social media. One of the questions was, what was your first car? Take a picture of your first car, and you see all these people putting pictures of their first car.
That's one of those security questions.
That's one of those security questions. So that's why I want to talk about this, is you really need to be aware of the information that you're sharing, especially stuff, as it says, that could be your potential password. But that leads me into social engineering. Right. When you start giving all this kind of information, you open yourself to social engineering. And as on the next slide, you see that the definition of social engineering, this one here, he's claiming that social engineering is our biggest threat. And the next slide is talking about what social engineering is. And social engineering is you manipulate, influence, and deceive someone through, just whether it's email, whether it's social media, but we give them bits and pieces of information to make this a lot easier. And if you'll fast forward a couple of slides, you're going to see one more. Some pictures here, some examples. I like talking about Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve, everyone knows that story. The serpent social engineered Eve. Eve social engineered Adam. So it's kind of been around from the movie Catch Me If You Can with Leonardo DiCaprio, talks about Frank Abagnale, and totally all about social engineering. The Trojan horse. Right. So that was that gift, and they got him in there. They social engineered him to do that. We all have children or pets or nieces or nephews, or you have customers or clients, or you think about it. And the next slide is a picture, and you think about your children and how they get you to do something that you normally wouldn't do every day. or your customers get you to do. That is how easy social engineering is. And so if you go to the next slide, we're gonna go through some more tips. But really understanding that you are vulnerable, that's why you got to be wary of those phishing emails. Some last few tips here: make sure your device is not visible. So you don't want that to be able to be seen from outside. There's some tips to do that. Posting pictures on the internet of your computer screen is not a good idea. I saw one on a social media platform where it showed a bank, and this particular bank was bragging on the employees working until 1 a.m. doing those PPP loans through the SBA.
Right.
Yes, giving kudos to those employees for working late, but on the screen, their screen's up, you see all the files right there. You have to really be aware of what you're putting that's in the background. So never do that on the background. The games school curriculum. Right. This is what you and I talked about, is the risk of when you allow that device to connect to the internet and they're going and playing games, you're not real sure where they're going, because a lot of people at home don't have a firewall to protect those. So if you have a work device, you might want to keep it separate than the device that's being used for games.
This is play. Right?
Correct. Or maybe you're doing a lot of online shopping. You know, when you do that at home and you don't have those proper security layers in place, you potentially open up a higher risk for being infected with a virus or something like that. And then it makes it really easy to go from that home environment into a work environment. So we kind of carry that infection with us as we move across those platforms. So
a lot of things to be aware of. I know that you've presented for people today. The people just really need to be aware and to pay attention. It sounds like a lot of what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And what you're seeing here behind me now in this screen is a little data sheet that I would be happy to share with anyone. We talk about washing our hands for 20 seconds, for the virus. So this one here is good email hygiene. Take 20 seconds and really read those emails and understand. We're seeing also an increase of people creating fake websites. Those fake websites are trying to get people to go to those websites and searching for the COVID virus, and those are infected websites. So the threat landscape is increasing. We just need to make sure people are aware of that. We're not going to escape from the internet or doing things remotely, I don't think, anytime soon.
It's part of our life. We just have to work with it. Right. Well, Jason, I'd like to thank you very much for visiting today, providing information. Like we say, so much has happened since the pandemic set in, but our way of life has really changed, and this is something else for people to be aware of. Thank you very much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Judy. I really appreciate this.
You're welcome. And I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for joining us this week on Newsmakers. I'm Judy Stiles. I'll see you again next week at the same time on this station.